My name is Laura. I'm a literature teacher at a college, and at first glance, my life seems perfect. Every day I wake up next to my husband, Jason, a successful lawyer with whom I've been together for 5 years. Our home is situated on the picturesque coast of Southern California, where the sun's rays paint our mornings in golden hues each day. We run together along the beach. Every step on the soft sand, every breath of the salty air reminds me how calm and harmonious my life feels. In the evenings, as the day comes to an end, Jason returns from work, and we settle onto the couch with a glass of wine, discussing the day that has passed or planning for the future. Rarely are there moments of hurry or arguments in our lives. We enjoy spending time together, and every minute spent as a couple is like another brick in the fortress of our love. "How was your day?" I asked when he came back from work. "Busy but productive. One client has a complicated case, but I'm on the right track," he replied with a tired smile, taking off his tie and casually tossing it onto the back of the chair. "Maybe we should relax over the weekend?" "Beach, sunshine," I suggested, pouring wine into our glasses. "Maybe," Jason replied thoughtfully, sitting down beside me. "But I was thinking that we haven't ventured out of the city in a while. How about going to the woods for the weekend? Something new for a change." The suggestion was unexpected. We always vacationed by the coast, enjoying the sound of the waves and the silence of the ocean. A cabin in the forest seemed foreign to our usual rhythm of life, but its novelty was appealing to me. "Sounds interesting. Let's give it a try," I responded, slightly surprised by his initiative. It was something different, but maybe it was a sign that he wanted to refresh our relationship, to add something new to our routine life. As Jason went to the computer to check his email, I smiled, looking at our photos on the shelf. We looked happy in every picture. At the beach, at dinners with friends, on small trips. It seemed that everything in our lives was perfect, and only new moments of joy awaited us. But sometimes, no matter how calmly the river flows, unknown currents can lie beneath the surface. The cabin in the woods turned out to be much more secluded than I had imagined. Tall pine trees surrounded it on all sides, and the familiar city noise was nowhere to be heard. The air was filled with the sharp scent of pine, and there was complete silence around us. No people, no cars, no usual sound of the surf. Just the two of us. We drove in silence for almost an hour, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we finally arrived, I looked at Jason. "Was this really your idea?" "You always preferred the beach?" I asked with a slight smirk, unloading our things from the car. "I thought a change of scenery would do us good," he replied, not taking his eyes off the bags. "Sometimes you need something new to feel the difference. It's not only the sea that should surround us." "You seem different," I noticed after a long silence. "I don't recall you ever suggesting trips like this on your own." "You yourself said it sounded interesting. We don't want to get stuck in the same routine, do we?" He turned to me with a slight smile, but his eyes seemed a bit distant. "Yes, of course," I agreed. "It's just, something has changed. You rarely take time off, and suddenly a cabin in the woods." "Laura, everything's fine. I have a lot of work right now, but I thought this getaway would help us relax. I don't want you to think I'm distancing myself." His words sounded convincing, but there was something strange about them. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but some tone or intonation made me uneasy. "I'm just taking care of us, that's all," he added, looking into the fireplace. Me too." I sighed and, leaning against him, closed my eyes. "We need more moments like these." He nodded but didn't say anything in return. That night, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. The wind was howling outside, and thoughts were swirling in my head. Our trip was supposed to bring us closer, but instead, I felt like an invisible wall had appeared between us. Maybe it was just my paranoia? Or was Jason really hiding something? After that weekend in the woods, our life returned to its usual course, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. "Laura, I didn't expect to find such a dedicated lover of the classics at the college," he said one day when we were sitting together at a table in the corner. I have a feeling that most people here lean more towards modern theories. I smiled, setting aside my cup of coffee. I love the classics because they have everything in them. Emotions, passions, and those questions that people have been asking themselves for centuries. Even today, the answers remain the same. I agree. Alex nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. But I've noticed that you like to discuss something more complex, less obvious. Not everyone can analyze texts so deeply. It's part of my job, I replied with a smile, but felt a slight flutter of anxiety inside. Alex was too attentive to details, to how I speak and what I feel. You always look so focused, Alex said one day as we walked out together after class. You should relax more. Maybe grab a coffee after work? I hesitated, feeling a slight pang of doubt. It seemed nothing unusual, just a casual invitation, but I couldn't ignore the inner voice that suggested it might go further. Maybe another time, I replied, meeting his gaze for a second. He smiled, easy and without pressure. Of course, whenever it's convenient. See you tomorrow? Of course. I nodded, saying goodbye. On the way home, I thought about how easy it had become to talk to Alex. There was no tension or difficulty. Everything happened naturally. Yet, it stirred mixed feelings within me. Why had I started thinking about him so often? Why did it feel easier with him than with Jason? When I arrived home, I didn't find Jason. On the table was a note. Working late. Don't wait. And once again, that feeling of distance, as if every day more empty space was appearing between us. One evening was particularly quiet. Jason was staying late at work again, and I, lost in thought, lazily sifted through the books on the shelf, trying to find something to distract me from the growing anxiety. The phone rang. Laura. Jason's voice was quick, but it had a strained tone. Hey, I'm going to be late tonight. Don't wait for me for dinner. Again? I felt a tightening sensation inside. This is the third time this week. Yeah, I've got an important case. He hesitated. My client, Pamela, she's got a complicated situation that needs a lot of attention. Pamela? That name suddenly sounded far too loud in the silence of our home. I had never heard of her before. Who is she? Just a client, nothing special. He abruptly cut off the conversation. Anyway, I've got to go. See you later. After he hung up, I stood there for a moment with the phone in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. A vague sense of unease crept over me, as if something significant had slipped through the cracks of our conversation, but I couldn't quite grasp it. Later, when Jason returned home, he acted as if nothing was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I decided to ask the question that had been lingering since that phone call. Who is Pamela? I asked, watching him heat up dinner. He turned around abruptly, but quickly tried to mask his surprise. I told you, she's a client. She's going through a tough divorce, and I'm helping her with the legal stuff. His voice was calm, but there was a flicker of tension in his eyes. Why haven't you mentioned her before? Because it doesn't matter, Laura. He brushed it off, returning to preparing dinner. It's just work. I don't understand why you're making this into a big deal. Okay, I said quietly, trying not to escalate things. But by then, the feeling of anxiety had already taken root in my mind. The next day, almost as if on cue, I ran into Alex again. We were walking down the hallway after lunch, and he, sensing my unease, stopped. Is everything okay? You seem a bit off today. His voice was soft, with a hint of genuine concern. Just a little tired. I brushed it off, not wanting to get into details. But Alex didn't give up. If you want, we can grab a drink somewhere after work. Sometimes you just need to blow off some steam. He smiled, clearly trying to cheer me up. I hesitated. The conversation with Jason was still fresh in my mind, and I didn't want to sit at home, stewing over my worries. But Alex's offer made me think again. Maybe I did need a distraction. All right, I nodded, surprised at how easily I agreed. We went to a small cafe not far from the college. The atmosphere was light, and Alex shared funny stories from his practice. Yet my thoughts kept circling back to Jason, to that strange conversation, and the name Pamela. A few weeks passed, and my suspicions about Pamela didn't fade. On the contrary, with each passing day, I started to notice small details that I might have overlooked before. One evening during dinner, I decided to ask directly. Jason, how's it going with your client? Pamela, I said, keeping my eyes fixed on him. He froze for a moment with his fork in hand, then carefully placed it back on the plate. Everything's fine, he said, but his reply came out dry. Her case is almost over, just a little more, and it'll be done. You've been spending so much time at work. We didn't even celebrate our anniversary. Do you remember? Laura, I'm sorry, he finally muttered. I'm swamped with work. I just didn't think it was that important. Those words felt like a punch to the gut. Our anniversary, the day that had always been important to both of us, no longer seemed significant to him? Not important? I could barely keep my voice steady. It's not just a date. It's our life, our family. Jason sighed and rubbed his temples. I get how this looks, but it's more complicated than you think. This is only temporary, Laura. Once things settle down, we'll get back to normal. I promise. I couldn't bring myself to say anything in response. Every attempt I made to reach out to him ended in empty promises. That night, we silently went to separate rooms. The next day, I met with Alex for lunch. We were sitting in a cafe, and I was telling him about the lecture I was planning to give. Laura, you seem a little distracted today. Is everything okay? His voice was gentle, as always, but now there was a note of concern that touched me. I stayed quiet for a long moment, unsure if I should share my worries. But eventually, I realized I needed to tell someone who would listen. Something's wrong with Jason and me, I admitted, lowering my gaze to my cup of coffee. Alex leaned forward slightly, his face becoming serious. What's going on? Do you want to talk about it? Do you think he's cheating on you? He finally asked after I paused. I thought about his question, but the answer wasn't so simple. I don't know, I whispered. I don't want to believe it, but something is happening and I can't figure out what. Laura, you have to trust your instincts. If you feel like something's off, maybe it is, Alex said, gently touching my hand. But you need to figure it out for yourself. Talk to him. Find out the truth. Don't let yourself stay in the dark. His words made sense, but I still had doubts. Was it all in my head? Or were my fears real? You're right, I said quietly. I need to know the truth. As I said goodbye to Alex, I once again felt how easy and natural it was to be with him. And that thought scared me, because maybe, behind all of this, there was something more than just friendship. A few days had passed since my conversation with Alex, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my fears were justified. Jason continued to act distant, leaving early every day and coming home late. He insisted it was all because of work, but I could no longer ignore the growing unease building inside me. One morning, while cleaning the house, I stumbled upon his jacket, which he had left draped over a chair. In the pocket, I found something strange, a hotel key card. My fingers froze on it, and my heart started racing. In our town? A hotel? Jason had never mentioned staying anywhere overnight, especially not in our small town where it would have been easy to drive home. I sat down on the couch with the keycard in my hand, feeling a fresh wave of suspicion wash over me. What did this mean? Why hadn't he told me? Maybe it was for work, but maybe... No. I tried to reason with myself, but my intuition told me this wasn't work-related. That evening, when Jason came home, I knew I couldn't put off the conversation any longer. I couldn't live with these doubts. Jason? I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I found this in your pocket. I handed him the key card. His face immediately changed as if someone had ripped a mask off of him. For a moment, he just stared at the card, then his expression hardened. Why were you going through my things? His voice was cold, almost accusatory. I wasn't snooping. I was cleaning and found it by accident. Why didn't you tell me you stayed at a hotel? I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check, though they were threatening to spill over. It's just for work. I had late meetings, and I didn't want to wake you. His response was quick, like he had rehearsed it beforehand. In our town? A hotel? I couldn't hide the sarcasm in my voice. Seriously, Jason? Laura, you're overreacting. It's not what you think. Pamela, she's my client, and her situation is really complicated. Sometimes I stayed with her to offer support. It's part of the job. His voice was firm, almost too convincing, but something inside me broke. You stayed with her? I couldn't believe my ears. Jason, this isn't work. This is something more. Nothing happened, Laura. I swear. It's just helping, purely professional. Do you really think I could betray you? His voice softened as though he was genuinely trying to convince me of his innocence. I wanted to believe him. I wanted everything to be as he said. But in that moment, something deep inside told me it was different. The keycard, the late-night calls, his strange behavior, all of it pointed to one thing. I don't know what to think, I finally said, feeling my voice tremble. But I can't keep pretending not to notice that something has changed between us. He looked at me with a mix of sadness and exhaustion. Laura, this is just a misunderstanding. Give me time. We'll figure this out. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the bedroom and closed the door behind me. Inside, everything felt upside down. From that moment on, our relationship would never be the same. After my conversation with Jason, I tried to remain calm, but my suspicions wouldn't let go. One morning, when Jason mentioned he had another late meeting, I couldn't hold back any longer. As soon as he left, I made the decision to check his phone, which he had left on the kitchen counter. Inside, I was a storm of emotions. I knew it was wrong, but I needed to know the truth. My hands trembled as I unlocked his phone and began searching through the messages. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but soon I stumbled upon his conversation with Pamela. There was something more than just a business exchange. Their messages were personal, discussing not just work, but her emotions and feelings. It seemed like Jason had become more than just her lawyer. Thank you for being there last night. You have no idea how much it means to me. Read one of Pamela's messages. Something inside me broke. This wasn't just a professional relationship. It was close, intimate, and I could no longer pretend I didn't see the obvious. The next day, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. If Jason wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would find it out myself. I started doing something that once seemed unimaginable. I followed him. Guilt filled me, but I couldn't stop. My fears needed confirmation, and I had to get it. That afternoon, when he said he had another meeting with a client, I followed him in my car. He didn't know I was behind him, and to my horror, I watched as he parked near a small cafe in the center of town. Inside, I saw Pamela already sitting at a table, and they hugged when he arrived. This was no ordinary client meeting. She touched his shoulder, leaned in closer, and they laughed together. I couldn't look away. Everything that had been building up in my mind was confirmed in that moment. I wanted to storm in, scream, demand an explanation, but my feet were glued to the pavement. I watched them as if they weren't my husband and my life unraveling before me. When I returned home, there was no doubt left in my mind. Jason came home later than usual, in a good mood, acting as though nothing had happened. I stared at him for a long time, wondering how I could stay calm, knowing what I had just witnessed. How was your day? he asked, completely unaware that I had seen him with Pamela. The usual, I replied quietly, struggling not to let my emotions show. That night I barely slept. Every detail of their cafe meeting replayed in my mind. Jason had lied to me, and here I was trying to hold on to the last remnants of our marriage, all while shutting my eyes to the truth. Everything I once knew about my life had shattered into tiny pieces. Fear, anger, and disappointment gnawed at me as I lay in bed, staring at Jason, who slept beside me as if nothing had happened. My heart pounded so loudly I thought he must be able to hear it. But he slept peacefully, as if the world remained unchanged. Though for me, everything had. The next day, I realized I could no longer keep this to myself. I called Alex. He was the only person I felt I could trust with my thoughts, even though deep down I knew that our relationship had long crossed the line of friendship. Laura? Alex sounded surprised to hear from me. Is something wrong? Can we meet tonight? I need to talk. My voice trembled despite my efforts to sound calm. Of course. How about the bar near the college? That evening, when I arrived at the bar, Alex was already waiting for me. I felt broken, and he noticed it right away. You don't look well, he said as I sat down across from him. Jason, I began, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know how to explain what had been happening. I just grabbed my glass of wine and took a long sip. Laura, you can tell me anything. What happened? Alex spoke softly, his eyes filled with concern. I saw him with Pamela. He's been lying to me this whole time. They've been meeting. My voice cracked. I buried my face in my hands, trying not to break down right there. Alex sighed quietly and moved closer, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this, Laura. We stayed at the bar for a long time, talking. Alex listened intently, never interrupting, and in his presence, I felt a bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. By the time we left, the night had long since fallen over the city. I didn't know how to cope with the pain, but one thing was clear. Alex had always been there when I needed him most. As we stood outside, I looked at him and realized that in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in Jason's for a long time. Care, genuine concern. Laura? Alex hesitated for a moment, his expression uncertain. Maybe this isn't the right time, but I think there's been something between us for a while now. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of the situation, but I feel like you mean more to me than just a colleague. His words were like a spark. Inside, emotions boiled. Pain, anger, the desire to feel wanted, to feel loved. And in that moment, I stopped resisting. I can't take this anymore, I whispered. And before I could think, I kissed him. It was impulsive, sudden, but I felt it was my way of coping with everything that had happened. We spent the night together. In the morning, I returned home, and though my heart was heavy, I knew that everything had changed. Jason's betrayal had pushed me to take a step I would never have taken under other circumstances. I looked at myself in the mirror, trying to make sense of everything. But one thing was certain. I couldn't live the way I had before. The next morning, I felt the world around me had changed completely. What had happened with Alex weighed heavily on my heart, but I knew that sooner or later I would have to face reality. When I returned home, Jason was already there, sitting in the kitchen, deep in thought. As soon as I walked in, he looked at me, as if sensing something was wrong. On the kitchen table lay a book Alex had given me, which I had accidentally left out in plain sight. Jason picked it up, studying the cover. What's this? His voice was tense, as if he had already figured out that something didn't add up. It's from a colleague, I answered cautiously, sitting across from him. But at that moment, I realized I couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer. We had both been living in lies, and if I didn't say something now, it would only make things worse. A colleague? Jason gripped the book in his hand. What's going on, Laura? I took a deep breath, feeling the tension rise in the air. We've been drifting apart for a long time. You've been spending your evenings with Pamela. I saw you two together. You've been lying to me, Jason, and I can't take it anymore." His face changed sharply. He looked stunned by my words. "Laura, what are you talking about?" he began, but I cut him off. "I know about you and Pamela. I saw you at the cafe. I saw the messages. You're cheating on me, and there's no point denying it anymore." My voice was firmer than I expected. Jason opened his mouth as if to say something, but then closed it and lowered his gaze. The silence that hung between us was the only answer I needed. "Laura, it's not what you think," he finally said. "Pamela is a client. She's been going through a difficult divorce, and I was just supporting her. Yes, maybe we got too close, but nothing physical happened. I didn't cheat on you." Those words cut through me, but they brought no relief. I had seen them together, seen their closeness. Even if he hadn't been lying in the literal sense, the betrayal had already taken place in his thoughts and intentions. "You supported her?" I asked bitterly. "And how many other supports have there been? Did you think of me when you met with her behind my back? When you started pulling away from me? And Jason, I made a choice too, one that will change everything." His face shifted again. He looked at me with confusion. "What do you mean?" I struggled to steady my breath, bracing myself for the confession I needed to make. "I was with Alex. We spent the night together," I admitted, feeling the weight of my words burn through me. But I needed to say it, to free myself from the lies. Jason's face went pale. His eyes grew cold, his expression tense. "You," he began, but he couldn't find the words. "Yes," I continued, feeling tears begin to well up. "I don't want to make excuses. I made a mistake, but I did it because I felt betrayed by you. You cheated on me emotionally, and I couldn't cope with the pain. We both made mistakes." He shot to his feet, pushing his chair back. His face was flushed with anger. "You cheated on me, and now you're telling me that I'm the one who betrayed you?" His voice was sharp, filled with rage. "You were with me, but you weren't really here," I shouted, standing up. "All this time you were with another woman, even if it wasn't physical. I couldn't take it anymore." Our argument escalated into a screaming match. Words flew like sharp daggers, each of us hurling accusations. At some point, I realized that this conversation was the end of everything we had built. What was supposed to be our life together had crumbled in that moment. "None of this matters anymore, Jason. We've both destroyed what we had. I can't live like this anymore, and I don't think you can either," I said, as our voices finally softened and the silence returned to the room. Jason stared at me in silence for a moment. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen. His footsteps echoed through the empty apartment, and I knew that this chapter of my life was over.